The hour being 7 o'clock, I would like to open up our charter review meeting of May 18th, and I'd like to start with our pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Well, we have on our agenda for this evening the police chief, fire chief, Department of Public Works director, and the capital planning committee. So, unfortunately, our school superintendent is at a school building committee meeting right in the lower town hall, pretty much as we speak. I received an email from Ben Sherman stating he has a conflict of interest and he will be unable to make this one, but he would like to come in at some later date. And it's my understanding that we no longer have any active members of the Capital Planning Committee.
I don't believe that's true.
Okay, good. I hope that is the case. So, without any further ado, I'd like to ask both Chief Ostroskey and Chief Freitas to come on forward, and we'll have some nice conversation regarding the Capital Planning Committee. Thanks for coming in, guys. And I think we'd like to pretty much refer to your role in the charter as being that Capital Planning Committee that I think has a lot to do with what's going on with capital acquisition, capital maintenance, and operation of capital within the community. So, that being said, I'd like to open up to the board for any questions that they may have of both chiefs.
So what hat are we wearing right now? Capital planning or chief's hats?
Well, let's say that, I guess you're wearing both, because as a chief of a department and as a member of the Capital Planning Committee, both seem to go hand in hand. You guys are obviously managing capital, looking for capital, and operating capital within the budget itself. So the focus, I think, ought to go on the capital planning portion of the budget, of which you guys play a pretty integral role. And I'd like to focus on that first, if we can.
Well, I apologize, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, but I wasn't aware that quite frankly, that we were here to discuss the capital planning committee aspect. As I mentioned from the peanut gallery at the beginning of the meeting, the capital planning committee has a number of members. We've had one resignation that to the best of my knowledge, has not been filled, that vacancy on the capital planning committee. When Jack McCarthy resigned, to the best of my knowledge, has not been filled. But there are other members of the capital planning committee, and I don't know whether they were informed of this meeting or not. And frankly, I wasn't informed that we were here as the capital planning committee, so I'm happy to answer questions about capital planning. But I would qualify any answers with, the caveat that I'm only speaking as one member. The Capital Planning Committee hasn't met to discuss this topic, and therefore I wouldn't be representing the feelings of the Capital Planning Committee. It would only be either me acting as the chief of the fire department or me as one member of the Capital Planning Committee, absent formal discussion or preparation for this discussion.
That's fine.
Could I just ask, does the capital planning committee meet? Do we have an active committee as stipulated in the charter? Reference like page 17, it says the town manager shall submit,
Yes.
So forth.
Yes, we,
capital program.
the Capital Planning Committee has met on an occasional basis.
Okay.
Frankly, the onus seems to be on us to produce a recommendation to town manager for him to meet the requirements that he's under, I believe also in this Section 8. The past meetings have truly been an analysis of what's been accomplished, typically outside the capital planning process, through grant, usually through grant or other non-municipal funds. Or we've had situations where town meeting has taken up certain aspects with or without capital planning action. So we've looked at what that's done to the capital planning effort and the plan, but usually it's a renewal of our prior recommendations, because honestly, I think since the formulation of the capital planning committee, none of our recommendations have been acted on except through other efforts outside of the board or the town manager's realm.
Or the committee's realm, for that matter.
Right.
Yeah. Would you say that at this point, there is a recommendation hanging out there somewhere from a capital planning committee that would still hold?
I'd say there's one hanging out there. I'm not confident that it's current.
Okay.
I think that there's been some significant shift in a variety of areas that would impact our recommendations. I will also say that our recommendations are dramatically focused, very narrow, in that we recognize the current situation, the fiscal situation. We recognize that there's been absolutely no mechanism identified to fund any of the capital projects. So the recommendation really has been to renew the status of those. Now, some of those have been impacted by, as I mentioned before, other articles. Some have been impacted by issues that have cropped up in other areas of anybody's operation that has kind of taken their number one priority in our recommendation and made it number 3 or number 4 because other things have jumped ahead. We've had change in leadership of some of the town departments. So I think, frankly, and again, this is my own view, and I defer to Chief Freitas, and again, I would ask that you seek the same information from the other members, but I think it really would demand us to renew our request to the departments and essentially update the plan from bottom to top at this point.
I think what we're after as a charter review is, does the language that speaks to a capital planning committee, the procedure that you're supposed to follow to get this done, does that work as a practical basis, or should it be changed in some way? I think there are always going to be challenges with, can we fund the capital recommendations, but the charter really doesn't address that piece of it. The charter says, you know, this is the way the capital planning committee is supposed to work. And so, you know, maybe at some later date, with some thought of the whole committee, we can address those things.
I feel confident that we have followed this language. I think and I appreciate your rehoming this, because I agree, I was getting a little bit too operational there. With respect to the language in the charter and the committee operating under that, we've used this language directly as our guidance, and this is what we've met every year. We've met the responsibility as designated in the charter. The one piece that might be worth taking a look at is the 150 days before the start of each fiscal year. I don't know where that target date came from, but that puts us, if I recall, right around the January timeframe. Budgets are in their infancy. We have no insight into local aid, so it's difficult for us to make, as it asks us to do, some recommendations about how capital improvements would be funded if we don't have that kind of information available to us. So that timeline might be something worth review.
Chief, one question. It seems that when I hear about major capital acquisitions as discussed at the Finance Committee, they talk in terms of 50,000 and greater. And when you look at this plan, as it pertains to both of you, the DPW and the school, do you incorporate in your plan those under 50,000? Or do you focus mainly on those over 50,000?
I'm trying to locate the definition of capital project, but
I don't think you'll see it in here, but I
I
think...
thought it was,
Yeah.
because there is somewhere, and that's been a little bit of a bone of contention, but frankly, we've looked at leaving what they consider small capital projects under 50,000, and large capital projects over 50,000. We've put them in one report, we've had them in separate reports. We've had a combination of those over the years. I'm not sure that I totally agree, and again, this is my own position, but I think that we've had some pretty healthy discussion in the Capital Planning Committee about this, but that the $50,000 mark is, we're not sure where that comes from and why that's held to that line, other than it's in language somewhere. And strict constructionalists, if you will, want us to stay with that mark. We've had some, part of the concern, and this is my own concern, is I can aggregate issues and make it over 50,000 so that I can get before the Capital Planning Committee and have a forum, or I can divide my projects into less than 50,000, because I don't want to talk to the Capital Planning Committee, but at the end of the day, so and the other thing is, we don't really see a process for the small cap. We don't see any kind of process out there for prioritization, or a forum for a department head or the community to be able to come forward and pitch a project, which you have inherently in the over 50,000. So over 50,000, you have to come to I say you have to, under the charter, you have to come before the Capital Planning Committee. That's a vetting, that's an ability for us to analyze that project, support it, modify it, work together to identify where there might be opportunities for us to have crossover among projects. We don't have that opportunity in the less than 50,000. And as a department head, I will tell you, there is no formal process that I'm aware of, other than the supplemental budget process, where we essentially list a project and a number, but we really don't have an opportunity to provide detail or make a case for our project. There's no formal process.
With your items, that must be challenging, because any vehicle obviously is gonna be more than $50,000 for you, but you still get other items. On the other hand, Chief Freitas, you do have a vehicle replacement strategy, right? That, and most of your vehicles would come in under 50.
When we get an opportunity to have replacement vehicles, they are all under $50,000, that's correct.
Right. I guess then what I'm hearing you both say then is that you're not feeling like you have, and again, these are tough times, but you're not feeling like you have an ability budgetarily year in, year out to just say you've got equipment that you need to buy. And it may have nothing to do with $50,000, you just got stuff you gotta buy.
Right, and again, I recognize the fiscal situation, but I also, yes, I don't feel as though there's a real good opportunity for us to, you can put it in your budget message, I guess, if you provide a narrative or a cover letter, you can identify those, but they're essentially listed in a supplemental budget, and in this day and age, I don't think anybody's really flipping to that page anytime soon, so. But that doesn't negate the project, and it doesn't minimize the fact that we have those needs.
Just to give you the historical the brief historical perspective, most of the things in our particular charter were adopted from the Shrewsbury Charter. I've said that everybody, that was on the Charter Commission at the time knows that. So there will be timelines and amounts and so forth, that unless we saw, when we were deliberating, any compelling reason, any, reason that we knew that it wouldn't apply here, we did not change it. This is the time that we would be making those kinds of changes. So we are interested in when a timeline doesn't work, we are interested when an amount doesn't work, that type of thing. The only thing I'll say that it will kind of put us in a little bit of a quandary, I think, when we get to the point of deliberating here, will be how tight do we make timelines, when one of the reasons why you try to do that, and again, it may be Pollyannish or naive, but you try to have budgets be thought of well in advance, not closer. But as you correctly stated, Peter, that part of the problem we have is information that we really do need, we don't get till late in the game. So while, every businessman would say you should have a budget well in advance, truth of the matter is there's information that we don't know until oftentimes after town meeting.
Right, and
Refresh my
I don't-
memory, haven't we been dealing with capital projects at the fall annual town meeting instead of the spring annual town meeting, or am I?
I think that was the philosophy that was supposed to be adopted, but I'm not exactly sure whether that, in fact, has even ever come to fruition, because the only things I would add to what Chief Ostroskey said would be just a couple of things, one of which he brought up because it was broached by Mr. Omasco, was the $50,000 figure and what exactly that means, but we've looked at this capital plan program, this particular section of the charter, as we've sat at capital planning meetings and such like that, and we know about the timeline to get a report in and being under the gun. Chief is absolutely right, and Adi, you're absolutely right. I mean, just today, the Senate budget came out, which has got more figures for local aid. That kind of information is extremely, extremely important for us at the capital planning committee. Every year, we talk about the same thing. And we're at this timeline to have something put together in January. And I gotta tell you, from my perspective, once again, only one person, I sit there and say, this is an exercise in futility, because we may end up with an extra, I'm being an optimist, we may end up with an extra $100,000 we could put towards capital. We don't have the foggiest idea whether we're going to or not, so what are we doing here, getting put under the gun by January to have a report done?
Well, that's the point of the question. I mean, if it makes more sense to be dealing with capital items at a fall town meeting instead of the May town meeting when you're dealing with the operational budget kinds of issues.
That's a possibility, but
maybe
it doesn't
that
say it
should be
here.
incorporated in the charter.
You both bring up good points with respect to, first of all, maybe that 150-day timeline isn't unreasonable to have a report on file of where we see the capital plan. We should update that on a regular basis and have a current review of it completed by date certain. Maybe what we should take a look at is placing a requirement that says that a capital project requires the action of the capital planning committee. Because right now, all we're doing is assembling a capital planning report with the town manager that goes forward to the town. But there's nothing that requires that if a department, for whatever reason, or anybody at town meeting wants to promote a project and put a project online, that it has to come through the capital planning committee at all.
Or
Now-
they even have to have a capital planning committee.
Common sense would say that, that the town would look at a project such as that and say, well, where is it on the capital plan? Well, it's not on the capital plan, then we really shouldn't be talking about it. But the fact of the matter is, that's not what happens oftentimes. The second point is with respect to the, I lost the second point, so I guess,
Well, let me help you with the second point, then I think it probably flows along that line. We talked about small caps. And my question to both of you is that, should small cap items be built into the annual budget? For example, if you know the average life expectancy of an asset that you have, it falls into the small cap category, and you say, we're gonna need this asset for X number of years, and you build into your budget, whether it's called a sinking fund or whatever may be the case, an amount each and every year that moves forward and says it's easier to adopt it into the annual operating budget than it is looking for a major capital acquisition at some point? Is that something that perhaps maybe the charter ought to speak to, or does it make
I think
sense?
that's been debated for 10 years and probably was debated even before that. And I'm not sure there's an easy answer to it, because in the current fiscal times, it would be great to have that philosophy, but on the other hand, at what expense does that happen on the other end? Just to take, for example, small cap and cruisers. If you really drill deep down, the department should be getting 2 cruisers every year in order to keep up with our fleet.
Right.
In order to do that in these current fiscal situations, the way the budgets have been rolling out with the numbers I've been getting, and I'm not trying to throw darts anywhere or anything else like that, I can do that, and I can have a brand-new fleet sitting up at the police station with no police officers in it to drive them around. So putting it in here into the charter and making that a hard, firm, fast rule, in a perfect world, that's great, but I'm not sure we're in that perfect world that we can do that.
And Harry, I think if I'm hearing your proposal correctly.
No, it's not proposal, it's the question of both of you guys. You guys are running the departments, and we're trying to facilitate
Well, I guess-
this charter.
I guess, again, it depends on how you look at capital.
Right.
And maybe this language isn't prescriptive enough about, and maybe it should, I'm not sure it should be. I think there's a companion document that may be missing from the discussion, and that is the formation of how do we what's the makeup of the capital committee? What's the kind of finer points of what the capital committee is charged with, and the process that we go through. It probably doesn't belong in the charter, because we want to stay at that high level, but I think my concern with that line of questioning is that it goes right to what I was saying before. If I, for instance, had the opportunity to lease purchase a large piece of equipment, but the annual expenditure was under $50,000, theoretically, I could go through a small cap process, if it's outside of the capital process. I could go through that process, get the $49,999 in my line item in my budget each year for multiple years, and purchase a large cap item over time, using that lease purchase. As long as it stays under $50,000, it wouldn't fall into the capital planning process, in theory.
I guess here's the question.
Question.
If you look at the language, this doesn't need, I'm confused with the last sentence in the first paragraph. It shall be based on material prepared by the capital planning committee, comma, if any including. I'm not sure what that means. I think that there's a comma missing there.
If any comma.
If any, comma,
Yeah.
meaning, is there a capital planning? What that says to me is that we don't need to have a capital planning committee.
Right.
And I guess the real question I would pose to you two gentlemen are, should the charter say that there shall be a capital planning committee who shall report to the town manager? Because this seems to me to put the burden on the town manager to come up with a capital improvement program. And my question would be, should it be mandatory? What's your feeling as to whether or not it should be mandatory to have a capital planning committee?
No, I'm not necessarily certain that it should.
Okay.
I'm kind of comfortable with this language. This puts the onus, in my opinion, where it belongs.
With
The
the town
professional management of the town. The professional, in the charter, the way I understand it, the professional management of the town falls upon the town manager. This is within the realm of that responsibility. Now, the town manager can slice and dice that any way that he or she feels. Now, that might be accomplished by a committee of the department heads. I think the department heads probably know well and maybe best about what their capital needs are for their departments, based on their mission and based on the expectations of the community. I can see value of the value of the town manager bringing in non-employee members of the capital planning committee to advise the manager, to say, Well, you know, this is the community perspective, but I think ultimately, yes, the reporting, it's a good point. The reporting requirement falls upon the manager. The manager can accomplish that through a variety of ways. And again, this is where that differentiation, the $50,000 mark, the makeup of the committee and so forth,
And if the manager doesn't feel a capital planning committee is necessary,
it's at the
Doesn't
manager's discretion.
so as a minimum, we need to change, put a comma in there.
Comma in there.
A comma in there, and probably make that a little more specific, you know, such report shall include, colon. the
Maybe change the
ABCD.
word "the" to a capital planning committee, if any.
No, I think that's a good point.
As opposed
That's a
to-
good graph.
Yeah.
But is there a bylaw or something perhaps in the town bylaws that creates that capital planning committee?
I'm
I
aware of.
don't believe so.
Where did all this come from then, becomes the question.
Great minds, chief, great minds thought that up.
I think it came from the Shrewsbury
Some great minds
Charter.
came
The
to
way
this
we've
committee
always
kicking
done
and
it.
Screaming, just so you know.
I asked, it doesn't seem so outlandish to have it 150 days prior to town meeting, and I think that was the second point that you were getting to. We were talking about 150 days being too much, and then Chief mentioned about how in theory we're gonna have some of these cap projects in the fall. If there is a surplus, say miraculously, as you were thinking, then you would have a plan in place at the fall, should the town decide, or should there be a plan or a program that in fact you could, because it is a capital planning program.
And I would backtrack on that. I think, looking at this as a whole, I think you're right. I think there's nothing wrong with having, again, date certain for the manager to have produced a report that is the current year's fiscal, or the current year's capital plan, because it's not necessarily tied to town meeting. And the second point was, I wrote it down when I finally came back with it, was that maybe there should be language in the town meeting, in the charter that says that capital items should be deferred to the fall town meeting for just those reasons.
Could we just place a place marker in the fall one like we do in the, I mean, without having a bylaw or some other?
I think that was the theory of how to do it
Mm.
from quite a few years back. It just hasn't evolved that way because people will put in, petitions at the spring town meeting or at the fall town meeting or any other town meeting that may come up. They can arise. I mean, there's nothing in here besides this report that says, like Chief Ostroskey said earlier, that any large capital or any capital items have to go and get a blessing of the capital committee. Anyone, if we had a department of widgets in town, and they wanted to get a new widget machine for $100,000, and their widget committee decided that they wanted to put one on any town meeting warrant, they can. And do they have to ask for blessings from the capital committee or the town manager or anyone else like that? No, they can go out and get 10 signatures and vote in a widget machine. And I don't know that it needs to be put in there, but I mean, I think that's where the issues start to arise.
And again, I think that this is a framework, right? This is the highest level that defines
Shouldn't
where
be
we
down
need to
into
be.
the-
The
into the
policies, the finance committee, for instance, adopted a policy with the Board of Selectmen, I think ultimately, to establish a certain number or percentage that the stabilization fund should remain at as a goal, as a policy, and with an understanding that, you know, we are where we are, but that's where we want to get to. I think that there is an opportunity to establish those policies. A policy would be whether or not there's going to be a capital planning committee. It sounds to me like that would be under the purview of the town manager. And the town manager could formulate and charge that committee as she sees fit. On the same note, the selectmen, as the policy board, with the advice of the finance committee and others, may also say that the policy is we're not gonna take up capital items. We're gonna deal with the operating budgets in the spring, and we're gonna, with the knowledge of free cash certification, local aid is now solidified, we get a glimpse into revenues for the first half of the fiscal year. Now we can talk in the fall about the capital items that may be able to come up. But I think it's prudent that those be policy issues and not defined in the charter because of and appropriately, the high-level aspect of of the charter. The powers are there. The opportunity to adopt and implement those policies is already defined, as I understand it, in the charter. So maybe there is, other than the comma, maybe there is nothing that we need to do further, except to recommend and support policies to that.
It might be worthwhile, though, to put in here kind of an outline to that effect. If nothing more than, people get confused when they say, 150 days before the start of the fiscal year. That would tend to mean to some people, you gotta have your plan in because we're gonna take it up at the Springtown meeting. When, in fact, if what we really wanna do is take up at the Fall Town meeting, maybe that ought to be somehow referenced in here, if that's what the plan is, so that we don't get people confused.
If we have to, when we have this discussion, Article 2, Section 4, page 3, the last paragraph specifically excludes anything from the fall town meeting that needs to be decided by a ballot of the voters. So that tells me that you cannot take up any debt exclusion or override issue at the fall town meeting, which I think a lot of your capital items
Well, it could be,
may
not
fall.
necessarily. but
Some
it
of
could
them
be.
may fall into.
But certainly opens that Pandora's box.
Yeah.
So when we have this, as we have this discussion, I think we just need to keep that in mind.
Yep,
We may need
that's-
to look at the wording in here as well.
Yeah, we don't want another conflict, Bill.
See, I'm just wondering if that wording was put in here specifically to make all financial decisions at the spring town meeting, which typically is better well-attended, and you have the election shortly thereafter, so it lines up not having to do another special election during the winter.
When is free cash certified typically?
Generally October, late November at the latest.
Yeah, but it may or may not be done in time for a fall
Right.
town meeting anyway.
Right. Some cases it hasn't been on.
But I think typically, first off, it is,
Yeah.
and second of all,
Huge effort to
there's
do it
actually
every year.
even, I think we've actually adjourned or suspended action at town meeting for a week or two until those numbers came in the fall, in order to accomplish that goal. I can see, in taking a deeper look into it, I can see some advantage to going into the budgetary process, as we begin the earliest stages of the budget, to have a glimpse at what the capital plan looks like. So even if we're not gonna take it up in the spring, and what I would say, I think Bill brings up a good point, but maybe if that capital planning effort is truly in effect, we can have a little further view down the road and say that we're not gonna take it up this spring. We're not even gonna bring it up next, in the fall meeting, we're gonna bring it up the following spring for just those reasons. So those policies or frameworks, and if it's excluded in here in any way, we should make it so that we have the ability to put I wouldn't say exclusively, that we couldn't put a capital project in any particular town meeting, but that our policy, our target goal is that there are certain times that we would bring those things up.
Chief, does it seem more fluid to do it that way as opposed to, we've had a fair amount of discussion as a group with the town manager and spoke about submission of articles. And generally, when you're gonna submit an article, it may be a capital improvement project. And if you're gonna stick to the budget, and the town manager is gonna work closely with the department heads within their budget, and a discussion take place during that budget-setting process regarding capital, would it seem to be easier to do it that way than to try to be thinking of when is it appropriate to submit a warrant article and then have to get on town meeting floor or to the board to discuss the merits of it? And secondly, how does the capital planning committee feel in terms of prioritization of that particular capital asset?
Well, did you have anything? I'm gonna take off my capital planning hat for a minute.
No, and that's okay, because I think that's what,
And as a-
practically, we want you here for
And
that.
act as a department head.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about, it's nice, I believe in the capital planning process. The concern I have is that not everybody has to play in the capital planning process. And as an example of that, right now, our charter, if I'm not mistaken, says that any multiple member board or committee has the authority to put a warrant article on the on the warrant without further action from the Board of Selectmen.
The board shall accept it.
So you're looking at two guys.
That's right. That's why I asked the question.
Capital projects that don't work for a multiple member board or committee, and therefore, we have to play by that rule, other people do not. And so, the capital committee, the process can highly recommend anything, but if we, you know, there's the potential that that prioritization, that effort, that work can go by the wayside, because when the warrant opens, before we ever get a chance to drop our articles off, there are articles from multiple member boards and committees that have locked up, if you will, available funding. And the Board of Selectmen and/or the town manager may sit back and say, Chiefs, I'd love to put these articles forward, but if this, and this are in there, then there's no room left for it. So there's a little rub there as far as the ability for some things to make it and some things not, and priorities to take effect or not take effect. Again, the town manager, my understanding of the charter and the goal was that we wanted to have professional management of the town, but we now have, we've even modified the charter since its existence to bring another elected board back online, and that's, every one of those now, multiple member boards and committees, doesn't have to follow the lead of the town manager.
So that points out that problem. The thing that's driving me a little crazy sitting here, is that knowing your departments a bit from the time that I've spent actually in this seat, I worry about how we distinguish those things that are really equipment needs that just happen to be expensive, and those things that are capital. And, you know, the 50,000 being too high or too low, that can play either way. But I think the greater problem is that, you know, whether or not, particularly in these austere financial times, whether or not the things that you and your men and women need to do their jobs are things that are part of the budget process anyway, or not. Because that's where the problem is. I think if again, to be a little bit naive about a capital planning process, one would expect it to be above and beyond daily operations. So the distinguishing factor should be, in working with the town manager, what really is ordinary expense? You know, how do you space out how often you have to buy new fire retardant material for, you know, suits for your firemen, and then, you know, how often do you have to do this, how often do you have to do that? And to think that every one of those things can or may or may not be a capital planning item is somewhat frustrating to me, because it sounds to me like an operational item.
It goes back, though, Arthur, to a couple things. One is the current situation, you know, the current fiscal situation being what it is, that we've had to, within our operating budgets, whittle away at some of those capabilities that were built into our budgets in order to maintain personnel and keep the services going.
Right.
It also goes back to, as I mentioned before, whether it's a small cap or a large cap item. It probably makes sense over time for us to spend $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 each year and keep the cyclical aspect of that going. But what happens is, at the end of the day, it turns into a $100,000, $200,000 project, because we haven't done that in the operational budget, and we haven't done that using small cap or whatever process, and it kind of, it snowballs.
Yep.
Well, as both of you are aware, we used to have regular equipment
Yes.
replacement in the budgets,
Yes.
cruisers and all the other things that you need, not only to operate on a daily basis, but to replace your rolling stock and all the
Yeah.
rest of it. And the current unpleasantness has made that very difficult.
Right.
I am wondering whether the capital planning process that's outlined in the charter needs to be strengthened. And I'm responding to the multiple member bodies who, or boards who can bring forth articles, at perhaps the expense of non-multiple member boards, and whether.
And I'm not criticizing
I
those
understand.
multiple member
I'm just
boards.
listening.
They're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, so I don't wanna,
No.
I don't wanna,
But if, as a town, we are attempting to manage our capital needs, and the charter has an opportunity to direct or manage that process for everybody, should the charter then require that capital needs at a certain level come before a capital planning committee? If any. We'll leave the commas in there.
Well, that could go, Barbara, to the discretion of the manager, because one of the ways around most capital might simply be, and it's certainly well beyond the realm of the charter commission, I think, would be something like a buildings supervisor or a buildings maintenance guru, for lack of a better term. If all of the agencies, including multi-member agencies and the selectmen and the police department and the fire department, the majority of really what I think would call capital expenditures would be more like replacement of roofs and those kind of things. Am I correct?
Yeah, that big stuff,
A simple solution without wasting time, I don't mean wasting time in a negative sense, but without codifying it in a charter, would be rectified by someone who is in charge of the buildings in the community and the replacement needs and such like that, and start to build on that. And I'm not sure that.
But isn't that the
obviously
town
it's not
manager?
available now, but
Isn't that the town manager in whatever way the town
you
manager?
bring in a town
He
manager, he's
wants
still
to.
not the expert on how long each.
No, but he or she can reorganize town
He
government
could,
based on this chart.
he or she could, absolutely, and that's why I'm saying, it may not even have to go to the depth of the charter or to the high level of the charter.
I seem to read a portion of this differently than a lot of people. And I keep seeing capital planning program, and everybody's looking at vehicles and fire trucks, and that is part of it. But there's another part of this coin, and the only spot it's addressed is in Part D. The estimated annual cost of operating and maintaining each facility and piece of major equipment involved.
Right.
And I even think capital planning program, it should be / asset management.
Absolutely.
Nobody is even looking at the major portion of this town. It's the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the piping under the streets. And by there, that's asset management 101 right there, with cost of operating and maintaining.
but
And-
isn't that I understand what you're saying, Jim, but isn't that the operational aspect? Isn't that the departmental responsibility to provide,
It might come from.
provide for the maintenance and operation for the
Yes.
lifespan of that capital
It
asset?
might come from the departments. It might come from, but it sounds like it's not part of the plan. This might be something that, it'd probably be more something Ben would bring to the table, but it seems in this, we're looking at replacing rolling stock. That seems to be the priority that's here. And I think the other portion of it is looking at the assets that we currently have, where we've expended the capital.
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm only saying that I think, item D, under section 8, is really to give us, the view that we should have in these acquisitions, regardless of what they are, but that, understand that this building, capital expenditure is gonna translate into an operational cost that you're gonna see in a future budget.
And really,
I think I'd be afraid a little bit that you would take away some of the operational responsibilities of the manager and the management team of the town from that's an operational cost. This is only to frame up the full scope of a capital acquisition. I think that's what D was trying to get to. I wasn't there when it was written, so I don't know.
I'm not sure what's in the capital plan. I'm just, at some point, maybe, would there be a value in this being a part? And if it's brought, if you know the value of your equipment, you know when it's purchased, You know how the value of that's going down, and there's a tipping point where the cost of maintaining it is gonna be more than the cost of replacing it. And you hope at that point, and it's kind of what Harry had went to with Scott, and it's just, is this part of the capital plan? Is this one of the considerations?
I think it goes back to the charge that the town manager places upon a capital committee if one's appointed. That's certainly within the scope of what the town manager might put as a responsibility for the capital planning committee if one's appointed.
And I read this not so much as an asset management. Now, whether we should have an asset management plan is another, that's a question.
But it's not.
But I don't think, item D here, I think is talking about those items that are in a capital plan that are gonna be approved. Okay, we buy the new roof, or we buy the new building, what's it gonna cost to maintain that new, something we brought online? I think that's what item D is talking to.
But if I could ask the committee to go back to a little bit of the discussion, I think it's section 7 on page 4, initiation of warrant articles. You know, a couple of you were architects of the original document, and I'd be curious about, you know, whether and I'm not saying that it's broken, but if you were to say that the goal was to limit, if you will, capital expenditures to be accomplished under the capital plan as described in that section 8. Is there opportunity to further define what the topics or subject matter of those articles sponsored by multiple member boards and committees would be? Was it the intent of the original Charter Commission that because those boards and committees were subject matter experts in the operation of their respective areas, that focus should be those things, for instance, such as bylaws? I would think that this would apply to the planning board, the zoning board, the bylaws and operational aspects that might need to be ratified by town meeting, but that those capital expenditures could be excluded from the authority to put those, so that rests with the town management. Is that a mechanism to get to? And again, it's not trying to take anything away from or cite a particular problem. I'm not doing that. I'm simply saying that that's a challenge for a capital planning committee and/or the town manager in the attempt to have a workable capital plan if you have avenues that are easily providing a way around that capital.
playing field.
I think that begs another question in terms of if the original intent was to have a professional form of government managed by a town manager. I guess the question would go to, how's it really going with the discussion with department heads in cooperation with the town manager, clearly identifying their respective needs from a police department to a fire department to a DPW and whatever other department as they roll up into the total budget, which is operational and capital in some cases? Is that level of communication and the prioritization that you guys see from your end discussed on an annual basis as it relates to that 5-year plan? Is it then communicated and followed as it should be per charter? I mean, that's the world of reality as I see it. That's really what's going on, without being too hypothetical, because we've had 10 years of this, and we hear a finite number of dollars chasing an infinite number of resources in terms of projects, and we wrestle every year with whose project seems to get a higher priority and others go onto the back burner and ultimately end up costing us more down the road. Is this thing really working? I think that's the real
Are
issue.
you asking, is the language of the charter working, Harry?
No, yeah, I'm asking, is the language of the charter technically working along with the town manager and the department heads, because if the language is driving the behavior,
Okay.
what's really going on? Because the net result is, are we maintaining our capital? Do we have sufficient money to do the things that we're doing? And can the charter, in fact, help to make that happen?
I mean, in 10 years, has it been a bust? I just don't see the
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think, you know, I,
hysteria, but I mean, we have a professional form of government, professional town manager is what we all seem to agree upon. He can use this committee or not use the committee. It sounds like all of them have to various degrees. And it's not the wording, or it has nothing to do with the words or the people, it's resources. And is that gonna change by tinkering with the language? Do you,
again, I would say, to me, from my perspective, first of all, yes, I think it is working the way that it's supposed to work. I, as a department head, know that my, you know, the way that I'm going to get a capital project on the docket is through the town manager. And that, you know, that's where I go. I present my now, I will tell you too that I don't bring a project to the town manager that isn't on my capital plan, unless something blew up last night. But, you know, I use those two processes to bolster my case. So, no, I don't think it's a bust. I think it is working the way that it's supposed to work to a degree. But I still remain concerned that those, the ability for the manager to manage, to truly meet the responsibility that he or she has with respect to implementation of the capital plan is weakened by the way that plan can be circumvented.
and in 10 years, how many times, in your opinion, has it happened?
I don't know.
I mean,
What,
like,
circumventing the
Yeah.
capital plan?
because you made a comment earlier that there's been nothing from the capital plan that's ever been acted on through the committee. So that's a bit disheartening. But yet, and you also referred to, it sounds like multiple member body boards, that didn't come out right, copying over the plan, the capital plan.
I think there have been some
Okay.
occasions when,
They have.
There have, okay. More than 5? For those listening out there?
I don't know.
I mean, I'm just trying to get.
So you think multiple member bodies have an unfair advantage over department heads?
And not just.
No,
Who makes up the capital planning committee, though? Right now, who's it made up? The fire chief, am I right so far?
yes,
The
absolutely.
police chief?
Yeah?
Okay. The DPW director?
No,
No.
No, he's not. In the past, has he been on it?
no. No.
Was Larry on that?
No.
I think it was maybe before that. Who else has been on that committee?
There's an ad hoc member from the board of selectmen.
There's 3 citizens.
The
It's
three
a
citizens?
5-member panel.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a 5-member committee. It's 3 citizens and the chief and I.
Hate to sound like a lawyer, but excuse me one minute.
Sidebar.
Unless your capital wants money, you do one, don't do that.
I'm just trying to get a sense.
Yeah.
So if this is.
Exactly.
Does anybody know where it's written that capital,
Oh, okay, you're right, all right.
capital, major capital items are over 50,000? Is that written somewhere?
Yes, it is. It is written somewhere. I thought it was in the
Yeah.
charter.
Yeah.
It obviously is not.
Finance committee.
It is in,
FinCom
I think
is,
it's in the
yeah.
charge to the capital committee. And
Okay.
The FinCom identified that area as I recall.
I may have even invented that a very
Yeah,
long time
yeah.
ago.
Oh, all right,
That's-
well,
that's
that's golfer
probably
right here.
ten.
Before my time, before my time.
I have a question.
Showing your age now. Our age.
Just
I
one.
seem to recall having a department that a long time ago.
Okay.
I want to take a question, but I want to get back to this point just for a second, and that is, I think hypothetically, you can see the issue of the potential for
Absolutely.
people to go off the reservation and to, again, debase the authority of the manager.
Yeah.
We need to
There's another side of that coin though, Pete, and that's that what if you got a rogue department head out there who's throwing articles on the town meeting warrant, and the multiple member body to which that person reports, or the town manager to which that person reports, is totally against that article? I mean, I can see that as being.
Oh, I'm not advocating that I be able to just throw articles onto the warrant. I'm advocating for all projects to come through the same process. I can't get on the warrant unless I go to the manager says, okay, we're gonna put this forward, and the manager and I go to the Board of Selectmen, and the board sponsors the article. I don't have the authority to sponsor, nor, if I'm not mistaken, does the manager have the authority to put it on the article. Only the Board of Selectmen. However, the Board of Selectmen and any other multiple member board or committee can put it on the warrant.
Now, do you think that is?
So Scott and I can't, and I won't cite another board or
I-
committee, but some
This is
other,
theoretical
the
discussion,
widget committee can. And so that, again, when the manager puts whatever process he or she puts in place to assemble the capital plan, it won't be worth the paper that it's written on if we continue to whittle away at the manager's ability to control that.
Now, do you have the same objection on non-capital items? I don't know what that might be.
Like what, like,
An operational override. I mean, so.
bylaw changes,
Bylaw
stuff like
change,
that?
yeah, the planning board doesn't like the way
That's what I'm wondering too.
the planning board doesn't like the bylaw as it relates to
But
the,
even another, a council on aging or a board of library trustees, they can come in at budget time and put another article on to raise their budget.
They can.
for-
Exactly.
What is the role of those committees in the charter?
Yeah.
Is my question to you. If the committees, so for instance, it's interesting because the Finance Committee, the way I understand it, is an advisory board that advises the selectmen and the manager and ultimately the town meeting. But they're an advisory board. Now, they're a multiple member board or commission, so I would assume that they'd have the ability to put a warrant article forward. But if they're an advisory board, is that really what our intent was? Do we have now there are certain statutory boards and committees, right? So I assume that, for instance, the zoning board of appeals, the planning board, they have statutory responsibilities, and that's why they remain in force and effect to accomplish those things. But generally speaking, if we have professional management, and we have a five-member board of selectmen, that's the policy-making board of the town, and we have the operational arm, which is the town manager, is it the function of those boards and committees to advise and support the town manager and that policy-making board of selectmen, but not to have that authority necessarily? Because again, the goal of the town is to have professional management. How can we continue to have these departments that are autonomous under that umbrella? I don't understand that.
autonomous with respect to the ability to submit an article.
In some cases, but in some cases, I think there's some that might have operational, responsibility, because a department head has a dotted line relationship between both their committee and/or the town manager.
Doesn't the selectman have the ultimate authority for inclusion on the warrant, regardless of the submission?
No,
No? They shall put it on.
I believe so.
It says,
Okay.
the
Okay.
selectmen shall.
All right.
I'm thinking, Harry, recently the board of selectmen have started in the last 3 or 4 years to vote on every article.
Right, right,
But
right,
that's not to place it on the.
right, right,
That's just
right,
a recommendation.
right, right.
This says any multiple member body
Yeah.
or any elected official can get an article put on a warrant.
Right.
Don't pass go, don't
Right.
collect $200, it
Right.
goes on the warrant.
The only elected official we have is really the town moderator. Really, when you think about it.
Board of Health,
Board
School
of Health?
committee?
School committee.
Aren't there elected
But they're a
members
multiple
of the
member
Finance
body.
Committee?
right, but
Yes.
if they make, if they decide they wanna put an article.
Right, as a multiple
they're not
member
saying
body.
no.
Right, right.
So elected or appointed, that includes council of aging,
Any
library
elected town
trustees.
officers, I guess I could read that to say a single member of
Board
the
of-
school
Board of Health?
committee could put
Yeah, that's the question.
an article on as an elected
Remember a
official.
discussion about the definition of an officer and whether a member of a committee could be considered a town officer? I
what it says.
don't believe so.
Was really the intent, Barbara, of this for the multiple member body, not as one individual of a member of that body, but the member of the body acting in unison as a majority vote?
I would say that the intent, and I'm just speaking from foggy memory, was exactly as you said. If the planning board felt that a bylaw needed to be changed, they could initiate an article within their purview. I don't believe that the situation of capital, probably even came.
Was in the mix.
No, but and the other thing, as I recall, was we had a great deal of sensitivity around wanting, we wanted the town manager form of government to pass, many of us on the commission. We had a great deal of sensitivity around how many, to what degree we were gutting, if you would, the authority of independent bodies, particularly those that were elected. So that if a group was still going to be elected, and we were not going to make them all appointed, then it seemed unreasonable to us to take away everything that looked like any sense of power at all from them. Because basically, one view would be, if somebody's on a ballot, and the vast, that doesn't have to be a vast majority, but oftentimes, elections are decided by a pretty good margin. So every member of this particular body was elected by 70%. And now that particular body no longer has any authority at all to do the charge that might be mentioned in a Board of Health regulation or a zoning, whatever the case may be. How many different boards and authorities that are either elected or appointed, you just say, well, I'm glad you're there, but by the way, you really have no independent authority, even though in some cases you're actually elected by the general population. So that's where we kind of walk the fine line between, wanting the town to support, in the most ways as this charter provides for a strong town manager, but at the same time looking at some sensitivities that could be expected.
Just to say that another way, and that kind of brings things back. If you recall, before the charter, we had a DPW board, we had a board of assessors, we had a board of health, we had a planning board.
Worked a lot of stuff out.
And many of those elected positions went away with the formation of the charter. But the boards all came before the Charter Commission and said, look, we have important work here that we do. And so I think Art's right. We looked at what the functions of those boards had been and tried to preserve those functions within the charter. And that's probably where that language was initiated.
Is there a list of what the remaining elected positions in town are?
Well, I think if you look in the back of the charter, Pete, you'll see the, I forget what page it is, but it talks about the power of appointment of the town manager. He shall appoint, or she shall appoint.
That's on page 26. Harry.
Yeah, 25, it starts with the Board of Selectmen shall appoint,
What we really should do is look at next Tuesday's ballot,
and the town manager shall appoint.
because that's where it is.
Yeah.
Well, this talks about an elected town officer, and the definition of a town officer is someone who has charge of an office or department of the town.
Okay.
That's on page 2. So it's clearly somebody who is an elected person who has complete control of that office, and the moderator is clearly one person like that.
But that's not a member of the school committee.
Right. It's not a member of the school committee,
Right.
or a member of the planning board.
Right.
Okay. And I don't disagree that those boards and committees have important work to do, and that they, again, are subject matter experts in particular areas. Again, I would highlight things like the zoning board of appeals, the planning board. They certainly have, by virtue of their office, a responsibility to perform those functions. But I think, again, that if the goal is to have professional management of the town, that we need to confine, if you will, those boards and committees to the subject matter that they're focused on, and leave the operational aspects to the operational lead of the community, which is the town manager.
All right, and I, again, as we try to decide what changes, if any, to recommend, we will be looking at the span of time in terms of what's been proven over those 10 years. To be, to be even more, to be concise this time, we were looking at trying to get a charter passed that provided for a strong town manager, recognizing the need perhaps for some degree of incremental change to make that happen. So certainly, 10 years later, there may be room for more drastic changes one direction or another.
I'd be interested to see, kind of in a way, whether or not there's been any impact on the success or lack of success with respect to some of those articles that were put forward, without some additional coordination between those boards and committees and the professional staff of the town.
Pete, can I ask you a question? I guess it goes to both of you, in terms of the capital plan is prepared by the capital planning committee. It then goes to the town manager.
If I can jump in for a second, Harry, we don't prepare the plan necessarily, we make a recommendation to the
Okay.
manager.
All right. Well, I'm only going by the language in the charter as it speaks to what it says.
And I think
Okay.
what Ken brought up earlier was
Right.
a spot-on point, and that is really, these are the requirements that are upon the town manager.
Right.
That the capital committee provides advice,
Right.
similar to the finance committee, to the town manager.
Okay.
So we write a
So that he can write the
recommendation.
report.
So when in fact, the ultimate decision is made as to which project moves forward and which doesn't, is that based on the collective input of the committee? Or is it just that the town manager sits back, says, I've got all my material, and I'm gonna move forward?
Well, I think, and I'll defer to the chief, but I think that I wouldn't stay on the capital committee if our recommendations were wholly set aside and went in a different direction without some sort of rationale. It would be kind of a fruitless effort. It has been kind of a fruitless effort anyways, but
I was gonna say, so far, the projects
Yeah.
have
we got some great recommendations, I gotta tell you.
Yeah.
the best recommendation.
I think that's why that question's hard to answer, because I could sit here and I would say to you, from my perspective, that, I don't know, because it hasn't happened. Because we make recommendations, we've prioritized, we give the manager every year, and we have given the manager every year, a manager, whether it be Joe Myers, whether it have been Alan Klepper in the past, or the current town manager, we've given our list of priorities and said, this is what we want. We've known going in, based on the fact that the finance director is in there with us at these meetings as an ad hoc member, that there probably isn't any money to get anything in any of these capital recommendations anyway.
Couldn't we help that process
We hear
along?
that along, we
By
make
having a
those
capital
recommendations, so it can,
And-
and the manager
Maybe.
decides.
If you've gotten,
A lot
you've
of
gotten
things happen.
cruisers in the
Capital
last
plans.
10
That's
years,
not in
haven't
the
you?
capital plan.
Tell me how the dump truck came
And
about.
you've gotten fire trucks, right?
The $200,000 deal?
We got,
Was that on the capital
the rescue truck that's on order right now,
Yeah.
was
Yeah, that's
the number one recommendation of the capital planning committee for 2
Exactly.
years.
Exactly.
And the manager ultimately identified the funding
Who's being
and process to put that
Okay.
on in the fall annual town meeting.
Right.
The,
But I'm saying.
so
your
I will
fire
say
truck
that
had something to do
the
with capital planning
managers
process.
have taken our input. I think what we've been able to do as a capital committee was to put together a process so that the department heads had a format. We were able to take in that data, to massage it, to hear presentations, and to present a concise version of those in support of those requests to the town managers. And the town managers have taken that information, they've put it forward, I think, as best they could, although those items were not funded typically. But we have seen some
The
projects.
bridge project is another one, as I think of it, because we did go out and there was an override, I think, question to do the bridge project. The manager takes our recommendations and picks the ones, and we prioritize, those are at the top of the list.
How about
But
the
has
dump-
it
how
happened
about
all
the
the
dump
time?
truck? Was the dump truck on that list?
Hasn't, because
Yes.
it's not been,
I think the one item that probably fell off the list that's not seen the light of day is the
Station
no,
two?
it's the master plan. We recommended that, frankly, it's difficult to look at proposals and to prioritize things, when we really don't know if Department X is gonna be around. So the fire department comes in and puts $1 million on for a ladder truck, and our vision of the town through the master planning process says, the fire department's not gonna be around. We're gonna regionalize that service, and we're gonna take a chunk of money each year and put it into that regional process, and that's really not gonna be our concern anymore. So we looked at that, and we looked at the number of requests that we had. If I remember right, the first year that I was chief of department, I rehashed our capital plan at the request of the capital committee, put it forward, and there was, with all the other projects in town, absent the school project, I think it was about $24 million was the total price tag of that. But there were things in there like the fire stations. We need to do something about 2 of our fire stations in our community. There's no two ways about that. One of them was built in 1908, one of them built in 1929. We're buying apparatus now that we're paying a premium for in order to get it inside the building. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know, because our master plan was last done, I think, in 1965, updated in 1985, that we really don't know whether or not a 3-station model, a 2-station model, or a 1-station model is the appropriate thing for our community, because we haven't done a comprehensive master plan. And that's one thing that fell off. And you know what? I understand why it did. It did because the things that are number 1, 2, and 3 in those reports now are the things that are falling apart, that we need to do in order to do the business of the town. But we need to probably get back to that vision, and that's something that the capital committee tried to facilitate through that funding request for a master plan.
The one question I have following up on that. For example, a warrant comes out, and there are warrant articles on there. Obviously, the Board of Selectmen weighs in with a formalized vote. Finance Committee recommends favorable, unfavorable action. When it comes to capital projects, does the Capital Committee actually weigh in? For example, if you've got a plan, and it's a 5-year plan, and you prioritize certain things, do you guys weigh in on a formalized vote to send a signal to the community that, in fact, we as a committee vote whatever number of votes, 5, 0, unanimous, we support this as part of our capital plan?
No. I think that, again, our responsibility, our charge is to provide advice to the town manager.
Okay.
And that, in my global view of the process, and it may be naive, but realistically, we should get a proposal from a department head as a capital committee. We should evaluate the merits of that, say to the department head, it's a winner or it's not a winner, go back and tune it back up and bring it back to us. Once we have those winners, we should line them up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we should present that information to the manager. The manager should identify then what the community can support in a particular fiscal year or through a particular financing mechanism, and present it to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen should, with those, the department head, the capital committee recommendation, through the manager, put it on the town warrant, and the town should move forward with it. But I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for us, again, because we're an advisory committee.
Okay.
I don't think it's appropriate for us to take a stance formally. We've already done that.
Okay, good, good.
The jet truck that we got, did that go through the capital committee?
Which one?
The jet that the sewer department got? I've seen on a capital plan.
It was on a capital plan, but I don't recognize that it was a
Because I know it.
highest priority.
Yeah, it happened quickly because of a particular event, and we kind of
Well,
scaled
the
back.
opportunity for it to move around
Yeah,
is in the capital committee's purview too, and I
Yeah,
think that we
but
saw that.
that never went through.
The
all of a sudden.
funding mechanism was another component of that,
Yeah, it was.
because it was an enterprise.
Enterprise fund, yeah.
Sounds to me like you gotta give it back, Jimmy.
They can find it, that's.
But I don't think we objected strongly to it, because at the time that it moved around,
Yeah.
moved up the list, there was a real, there was also a real reason
And
to
it-
make it move
It
around.
didn't just fall out of the sky, it's something that had been talked about, but it wasn't, I don't think it was formally,
Yeah,
put
that's why I was
forward by
just
the
wondering
capital.
if it had gone through in any type of formal process.
Are there any other questions, concerns that both of you have, or observations you'd like to share with us regarding?
you're doing a great job, committee.
We're just trying to help you guys, that's what we're trying to do.
Relative to, we've talked primarily here about capital, am I correct?
Right.
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 What about
That
you?
question
Town,
about-
town manager, form of
is
government
it-
in general.
is it Town manager, form of government?
Yeah. I mean, the charter, what the
Charter.
charter does in broader terms, I guess, than just capital planning at this
In
point.
terms of him as a police chief?
I'm not
No,
in the
no,
charter, I don't think.
No, we've invited anyone that's been in front of us to talk to
Yeah.
us in general terms about the charter.
Right.
Obviously, we would expect that in some ways it would have, it would relate to your jobs, but you're also both, esteemed citizens of the community too, so we're also curious just how you view how the town charter has worked.
The only thing I can, and you've probably heard this, in many meetings by now, but, again, some of the timelines, that are established in the charter can be a little bit unwieldy.
Timelines have been coming through loud and clear.
Sure. Yeah.
They present some hurdles that, I think it's raised a frustration level in some arenas, because
Oh, yeah.
we have to do certain things that people consider gamesmanship, putting placeholders in. We're getting real good at putting placeholders on warrants in order to meet the timeline of the charter, the letter of the law. But the reality of it is, we have to put those placeholders in because we don't know the numbers, for instance, on a particular item until way later in the game.
Perfect sense,
So
yep.
if there's a way to manipulate that stuff a little bit better, then it might be to everybody's liking.
And placeholders might still have to be the answer, in reality. I don't have an issue with the charter itself. I wouldn't be one to advocate getting away from the town manager form of government. Has it always worked? I'm not sure it's been because of the charter. If it hasn't, or if people have opinions that it hasn't worked, I don't think it's because of the charter as much as it is how the charter has been utilized. by the
In
parties.
instances where you think it may not have worked, or you think people may think it hasn't worked, what do you think the reason for that is then?
How it's been imposed by the people dealing with it. That's where I think the problems might be, not so much the charter itself. I think the setup here is okay. It's just a matter of it being allowed to work, for lack of a better term. This is just my opinion,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure that there hasn't, as a matter of fact, my opinion is that there's been a lot of resistance over these 10 years for a lot of parties that be to actually let the charter as it is scoped out work. If people don't like, for example, what they get for an answer from the town manager, they go around the town manager. It's things like that, and that's where I think the issues are. It's not the charter, and so to pontificate on them at this point with you folks, I don't think is necessarily the right thing to do. I think it's been more how it's been implemented as opposed to what it actually says. I think the charter itself is
Do you have
okay.
any ideas for any type of, or any thoughts on enforcement mechanisms? Force people to adhere to? And that's okay if you don't, I mean, it's pretty,
I don't, but I'm a little embarrassed by that because, it's awful easy to make and why I say that is because it's awful easy to make a criticism of something working or not working, but if you don't have the solution, you
well,
probably
yeah, I
shouldn't
mean,
be
this is,
saying
the
it, but-
enforcement of a charter is pretty difficult.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, we don't want the police department having any authority on enforcing the charter, I'll tell you that right off the bat. We gonna
There'll be no
have to
fines, there'll be no fines for $100 a day.
do. But, you know, I mean,
Fire department should do it.
no. I don't know.
Do both of you feel as department heads that when you bring a priority to something you feel strongly about to the town manager, do you feel your needs are being met? Have you found times with the current structure where maybe you didn't feel, you know, it's, because you're pretty much going, you don't have a board in front of you, which we've already established. Has the,
For the most part, I think that the managers have responded appropriately and have recognized, and worked with us, to find a solution to issues. I think, maybe to echo a little bit of the chief's comments, I kind of feel like we're still a little bit in the implementation phase of this charter 10 years later. I'm not sure that the lines are heavy and dark, and I might be a lunatic with crayons, but I think that some of the lines still have to get heavier about the roles and responsibilities. There's still some tentative aspects in certain cases of the management of the town that I think still are playing out. And I don't know whether that's typical of the implementation of a charter and the transition from where we were to where we're going, or if we're behind the times or ahead of the game. I don't know, but I think that there's still, to me, it feels like there's still a regular diet of questions about, well, this is the manager's purview, or this is the board's purview, or this is the other committee's purview.
Do you think you sometimes end up doing your job twice? I mean, I see you come to the Board of Selectmen's meetings, and both of you are here, and you're at the podium on a pretty regular basis. It would seem to me that a lot of that stuff you would have already have gone through the town manager and discussed with the manager. Ergo, why do you need to go to the manager and then go back to the Board of Selectmen for the same issues? Now, is that an instance where the charter really isn't, maybe not the charter, but it isn't, government isn't functioning the way that it should with a stronger town manager?
And
I don't see that.
I want to be cautious about how I respond to that in a way, because I don't want to in any way comment or have anybody think that I'm commenting on personal performance. But I think that it kind of gets back to my implementation and the roles and responsibilities piece. It's whether or not and not personally, but for the positions, whether the board and the manager have confidence in each other on those roles and responsibilities. And whether the manager, to get to your point, to me, when the manager presents something to the board, and I'm here, I'm on the bench in case that technical piece needs to come to the table, but the manager's the one that presents those items for the fire department, not the fire chief. Fire chief already, as you say, presented it to the manager, and the manager said it merited, it merits the attention of the board. The manager would put it before the board, and I wouldn't expect that the manager would get into the nitty-gritty of a proposal, but that's why you have the professional managers.
I mean, at least from my perspective, when I watch this stuff, it seems like you guys got an awful lot of detailed questions from the Board of Selectmen that are, I sit back and I say, why is this coming from the Board of Selectmen? How come this hasn't been resolved beforehand?
And I think
Maybe that's just the composition of the
exactly
people that are
that's
sitting around the table.
that comfort level with the role of the manager and the board. And that's that, it's not a criticism, but it's the policy responsibility of the board and the operational responsibility of the manager, that if you had to narrow down where
That's
that
it.
heavy black line needs to get some reinforcement, maybe that's it. those operational aspects. Those, you're right, I would expect, and I prepare and I expect to be drilled on those aspects in that office before it ever comes out here. And the board should have the confidence that the manager's doing that. That's the manager's responsibility.
Right, I think that we do give a double message to all parties involved, you all, the town manager, whoever that may be, going forward, and the Board of Selectmen, that we put everybody on TV. The idea is that this is the forum in which people hear detail about something that's going on in town. So, having sat here as a member, and you've been guilty of this too, don't tell me you haven't, you feel like you should be here, you should be asking intelligent questions, you should be fleshing out the discussion, because in fact, you're here trying to have a meeting, and there's somebody here talking about something of import to the town. So it's, it sometimes may come across, and sometimes may actually be seen as pejorative in some way to the town manager or to the department head, but sometimes it may not be at all. It may be the member feeling like their job is to, in fact, give this person a forum to say what it is they're trying to get accomplished. So it can cut both ways. And we do give mixed messages when the people that are on TV, and again, having served, not knocking it, I can walk the tightrope just as much as you are. But the point is that when people are on TV, just as we're doing right now, they expect that people want to hear them talk, not for any great conceit, but because they're on TV, they're supposed to be listening, they're supposed to be participating, there's supposed to be discussion happening. And sometimes that's going to happen to an extent.
Kind of like a scene on TV, you get
But sometimes it does happen.
Questions being asked by the Board of Selectmen, I say to myself.
I'm not saying it can't go over the line.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it can't go over the line. But I'm saying is that we do give people a mixed message when we have a body politic meet every 2 weeks on TV.
I do agree with that.
Just
We're
to
on TV.
respond, just,
We've never had,
Yep.
this has never come up before, I'm just kidding.
yeah,
This line has been,
that's exactly what I was
Yeah.
going to say, just so you don't feel, like you're hanging out there to dry. We have heard, in other sessions,
Yeah.
that the implementation of the charter, rather than the charter itself, could be problematic.
Right.
And that very specifically, the roles, as defined in the charter, may not have really settled in. The fact that I think it specifically says the Board of Selectmen shall not involve itself in the day-to-day operation of the town.
Right.
And so the kinds of questions that you've observed
Right.
and that you're talking about do still tend to happen. And maybe, maybe 10 years is too short a time to get out of the mold that's been cast for years and years and years. But I guess my desire would be, as part of this process, to determine if there's something in the charter itself that either needs to be changed because it just doesn't work, or needs to be strengthened so that it would work better. And that's what I'd like to kind of aim toward.
Any other comments?
Just a couple quick questions, and as I call them, the straw. Right now, we have a 5-member Board of Selectmen. Both of you are old enough to remember the times that we had a 3-member Board of Selectmen. Some communities have made a determination that a 3-member board is easier to operate than a 5-member board or whatever, just putting that out there that, I don't think we really took that on when we wrote the charter 10 years ago, so I'm bringing it up there now as a question. 3 or 5?
you wanna go first, or you want me to?
You go first.
I'll step in this one. I think the meetings would be a lot shorter on Monday nights if there was only 3. But I don't think it really matters, because the input from the board, based on their responsibilities, will be the input from the board based on their regardless of whether 3 or 5 are sitting there. I think that it's a lot easier to come, the smaller the numbers, the lot easier it is to come to consensus. I'm not sure that that's the way people in a fully democratic philosophy believe is the way it should be, but it's a lot easier to make decisions with fewer people.
I may be in the minority on this response, but I think 5 has worked out okay for us. I think that, you know, how meetings are managed or not managed or whatever is a whole different topic, but I think that you have a little broader perspective with 5 members, and I think that it at least would seem to me that it's less of it's much more difficult to create a block of votes in the 5-person panel than in a 3-member, you know, where you only need 2 to really control the board. And it's much more difficult to get a 3-person majority on a regular, or on a, you know, as kind of a block that routinely acts in one direction. So I think the 5-member board broadens it out and brings some perspectives that is kind of a leveler. So to me, I think a 5-member board.
Okay. And the other straw question I've been asking, when we did the charter 10 years ago, we were pretty clear that we were going to stay with a open town meeting, and there was really not a whole lot of debate back and forth. There was some, just to give it some airing, but basically people were almost unanimous, I think, right from the start, that it would be an open town meeting that would be proposed as part of the charter. Is that something we should revisit and look toward a representative form of town meeting? And I want you to think, one thing I haven't, one condition I haven't put on this question in the times that I've asked this in the past, but I want you to, you know, obviously you've been the town moderator in the past, think of those meetings that had thousands of people there for one reason or another, and think of those meetings that had, is it 60 that we have to have? 50, like the last one. You know, so think of the times that, you know, the way this thing is swung in terms of what it means to have an open town meeting. And then, again, you still, I mean, as I do, I'm still pretty much of the mind of an open town meeting, but I think I always like to kind of reflect on these wide swings that we've had.
I heard your questions before, because I was sitting in the back one time and
Yes.
another person in here, so I kind of.
That's
I
like
had a
cheating, but, you know,
I'm
Reads
sorry.
ahead.
But I thought about it after you said that, because I said, I'm sure he's gonna ask me again, because he said he was gonna ask everybody, and I knew he would. As I think back on the number of times we've had a lot of people show up at town meeting, there's not that many. It's been very, very, very limited times that we've had the enormous number of people come to town meetings, and from what I remember back on, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it basically revolved around the new school situation. Not that I wanna bring up whether it was.
Schools and
a good
racetracks.
Racetrack.
Yes, all right, and I think back on the racetrack, but
Make it double.
if you think about the issues, there's only been 2. If you look at all the other times, we've only had, the smaller number of people. I would tend to like the representative town meeting simply to keep the numbers down, but at the same point in time, I know this is a real wishy-washy answer, but you're not getting a huge number of people. But what I see, and I don't know why this is happening, but I see a huge disinterest in the regular citizen wanting to get involved in town government. And I know it's not the Charter Commission's issue in and of itself, but relative to that question, with such a short number of, or a small number of people wanting to get involved, it would almost seem to me, whether it's because of time, whether it's because of interest and such like that, that maybe a representative town meeting might be a better way, because then the different areas or groups of people could elect one person to go and represent them at the town meetings. Now, on the flip side, I've also said, but if they won't even get involved in a committee, how many people are gonna wanna become representative
Right.
town meeting members?
there are towns that have vacancies. Yeah.
But
I would
typically,
go-
a representative town meeting would have
Yes,
something like
yeah.
200 members,
Yeah.
or 250
Yeah.
people, so you know you'd get a pretty good sampling.
Right.
Provided you get enough people that would wanna run for those particular districts. That's the biggest fear I have about that. I think you gotta stick with what you've got right now. With just the regular open town meeting, just to make sure you get your 50, because I'm just afraid that if you went to the representative town meeting, you wouldn't get 100 or 200 interested people who wanna run for the different, villages, for lack of a better term, or groups of people to be represented.
The reality is if there weren't street acceptances last week, we wouldn't have had a quorum.
Yes, we would've pulled the whistle from the police station,
It's true, though.
just like the old days.
Yeah.
Stay
But
open.
but it is the pendulum. It does go back and forth, and at the end of the day, I'm a believer in every vote counts. And, you know, some of those really big town meetings, you know, the racetrack I think my mother had, was at the time the largest town meeting that we had ever had. It's been usurped, by some of the more recent ones. But you know what? Some of those votes were pretty darn close. And I'm not sure that representative town meeting, when you get into those kinds of debates that affect our community, are, whether a representative is finite enough for me to have confidence that that vote represents a block of people. Because if that issue is there, and people should have the ability to come forward, be heard, and let their vote count. So, to me, I'm into open town government. Maybe I'm an old timer, but I think it's the opportunity to go before the town and address your concern. And I'll say, quite frankly, I've had my mind changed by someone at that podium during town meeting many times because of a point of view that I didn't think of, or a perspective that they brought as a member of that neighborhood, or somebody with specific knowledge. And I thought that was very important, and I'm not sure that you can capture that.
There's also a lot of other secondary benefits to some of these large meetings. I remember one at the gymnasium. I was sitting, there was on the board at the time, and Ken was up on they'd set up a stage, and I know for a fact that was the closest Ken Redding ever got to the rim.
Well, being a member of the Vertically Challenged Club, I understand that.
I guess my biggest concern about the open town meeting is, that school meeting, we had 2,100 people there. That is a bear of a meeting to try to run, and at the end of the day, maybe some minds were changed. But, when somebody gets up and moves the question right away, you don't even have a chance for that opportunity. So I guess my take on this is an open town meeting is good, but if this charter had a mechanism where we could somehow notify people in advance that a particular matter was going to be held by within the town meeting, a ballot would be taken, and the meeting would be open from 8 in the morning till 5 at night, so people could come in and just vote on that one item. I think then you could do all the business for those people, the rest of the town that's interested in the articles and the budget, but for those people who are only interested in voting on the school, yes or no, that should be an option. And, up until, I explored to see whether or not that was an option. It wasn't, but maybe through the charter process, and maybe we need to ask somebody whether we could incorporate a mechanism such as that in the charter.
But those meetings are the outliers.
They are.
And, the 2100s and the 49s are the outliers. For the most part, it's been a long time since we had to run up and down Main Street, close the diner, and get a quorum. People are typically, and it might be a core group, it might be a limited number, but people are there to do the business of the
I
town.
can tell you, the meetings I enjoyed the most, when we had them in the auditorium, and there were 300 or 400 people there. To me, that were the best meetings, because you had a really good cross-section of the town. It was in one spot where people could hear what was going on, and it was manageable, I thought. So at least from my perspective, those were the best meetings.
But I think for the most part, the open town meeting is it's productive, it's an opportunity to make sure concerns are heard, generally speaking, and I think it's a good way to go. While we were talking a little bit about those items, I kind of read through a couple paragraphs here to get to the basic question that you asked. And I really believe that when you look at the language that's in these paragraphs, you know, paragraph B under section 2, Board of Selectmen, and it describes the board's powers and duties in general. And the same on the powers and duties of the town manager under Article 4, Section 2, on page 10 and 11. You have some pretty good language in there, and I think it's a matter of that bolstering that black line. I really do.
So maybe some
So I don't-
bold, some italic.
Well, it's all, I
Lines.
noticed too that it's already bold, so I don't know whether italicizing it will make a difference.
Highlighters. They stand
Underlining
out.
gets too busy, but, I frankly, it's,
18 point
you know, you were wondering about whether or not, and I can tell you, I don't have any specific language, that I would encourage you to incorporate.
I think the term one of the members of the Board of Selectmen use, we have a toolbox, it's whether or not we use the tools that are in it.
Or they use too many tools.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to hold you guys up any longer. I'm sure you've had a long day, and,
You didn't ask us about the mayoral form of government, though.
Well, because you all went right to the town manager.
Yeah.
Fine. I presume you hate mayors.
Well, it
We
is,
don't hate him, but boy, you're talking about being rife for corruption.
The
Or
police
for
chief
agendas.
does.
That makes no sense to me, so I'll just give you that answer, because I know you were gonna ask. Against the mayor.
there you go.
He's talking on the radio now.
look at all the development he got.
Certainly turn around Providence, at least he can help us next. Oh, whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Okay. Well, Mary Pat, I apologize. I know 8:30 is come and gone, but 9 is
Oh,
certainly
was that
within
what
the-
we were aiming
yeah.
for? No one told me that. I came in just a little bit late.
Okay.
No, I'll just.
I would like to call your attention to 3 sets of minutes, and I'd like to hand out the April 6th as well. We have not had an approval on those yet. So here's April 6th.
Has there been any change, April 6th?
No, not from what
It's
went
a
out.
two-pager? Yep.
Some of these are front and back.
Yeah, front and back.
Gonna be,
And I'll also give you the April 20th as well, seeing Bill just handed me the April 20th.
these, the April 6th one and April 20th, we tried to
That's
do.
front and back. That's all the
The
same.
April 6th, we tried to do it April 20th, but didn't have a quorum.
April 20th. April 20th. I don't need-
Let's go to April 6th first of all, seeing that's the one that's way back, that's front and back. Bill, any comments on the minutes for April 6th?
The same as, the draft that went out.
Okay.
I will just add that I did get an email from Peter Demers that I have not forwarded to you all yet, but I will, that articulates much of the discussion that he brought as part of his role as chair of the Finance Committee that night.
Okay, good. So you want to add that to the minutes of the meeting?
No, it doesn't need to be added, it's just
Okay.
for you all to know that,
Okay.
that I will
I
be
actually
forwarding that to you.
included in there, Mr. Demers said a copy of the list.
Okay.
he provided came through.
So therefore, I'll accept a motion for the April 6th minutes as given. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
I'll
That's-
abstain.
Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 2 abstentions and 5. 5 in the ayes and 2 abstentions. Okay. Oh, and I will have to abstain. I apologize, Bill. I've got to abstain too. I was absent of that, so there's 3 abstentions here. 1, 3. Okay? Thank you. Okay, April 20th, that was kind of a brief one-pager.
Motion to accept?
Is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Abstain.
Okay, so that's,
Abstain.
okay, so there's, got the count on that, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll turn your attention then to the May 4th. Actually, the top says May 2nd. It is in fact May 4th. That's a correction on that. Once again, thanks a lot, Jim, for pinch hitting for us on that.
move the minutes of May 4th.
Okay. There's been a motion to accept the May 4th minutes. Is there a second to that? Second? Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Abstain.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think that, I've gotten word from you that one of our members has resigned.
Yes, I was going to read.
Okay,
Well, we really don't, I guess the option was that had he not resigned per charter, we could have taken a vote. I approached the chairman of the board after our last meeting and indicated that he hadn't attended 5 of our meetings. And she called, and he has submitted his letter of resignation to the Board of Selectmen / Town Manager. And as of 5/9, he officially resigned. I've had some discussion, the chairman of the board has approached me regarding the process of reappointing. It's on their agenda for Monday evening for consideration for another appointment.
okay.
I think there's been some folks that have indicated an interest, so they'll discuss that Monday evening. Okay?
Okay.
That is Jim Smith.
Yes, correct, right. And I have his letter right here, so we can add that to the, yes, please. Okay, one other thing I'd like to just point out before we adjourn, and I had failed to include in our list the planning board for a visit with us. So based on that, I'd suggest on July 6th, where the zoning board of appeals is coming in, the Board of Health, the Rec Commission, Conservation Commission, that we also include the planning board for a July 6th visit, if that's okay with everybody. Or do you feel that's too much that
That's
evening?
kind of heavy,
Yeah.
don't you
Too heavy.
think? How about the next one?
July 20th? Yeah, that'd probably be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's-
Okay. So I'll notify the planning board that they'll be up on July 20th. Okay, good. All right. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 1st, which time the town clerk, town assessor, senior senate director, and council on aging. I'm not so sure we'll hear much from the council on aging or the director now that the change has been made, but I think they'll still want to come forward. I know I've had some conversation with Marcia, and I think she's looking forward to stopping by, so. That being said, I guess all our business is pretty much complete tonight. Is there
Move to adjourn.
okay, is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mary Pat.
Did we keep you overtime?